All right. Yesterday, the title of the class on Friday yesterday, whatever, was blowing stuff up and ... And today's title is ... and making people care about it, which is really the tricky portion of writing. So just so I have an idea, how many people in here are would-be authors, aspiring authors? Okay, congratulations. To y'all. It is, I know exactly what it feels like to be an aspiring author because I did it for 10 years. I'm sorry, what? Oh, that was somebody outside. And I'm like, golly, they're so rude out there being all loud. I wrote my first novel when I was 19. It was awful. I wrote my second novel a year later, a sequel to the first novel. It was awful. And then I did novels number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 with similar results. They were terrible. And then I wrote the first book of the Dresden Files. So, and then that took, that actually finally got a nod from my writing teacher, and she gave me a letter of recommendation to her editor, and that manuscript went to her editor's desk, and magically it sat there for 2.5 years. After which I eventually managed to secure my own agent at a convention, and then she was able to sell it to a completely different editor within about 6 months. So really, publishing, you know, it's quick, like instant coffee. So if you're into that, if you want to get yourself published, be prepared for a marathon. There are some people who write their first novel and it's awesome and they sell it, and there's some people who write their first symphony when they're 5 years old. I'm not one of those guys. I kind of wish I had been, but on the other hand, I learned a lot. I did not have a whole lot of innate talent when I started writing, and when I say that, people go, "Oh, yeah, right, whatever," but no, it's true. If I could make you read those first manuscripts, which I couldn't because you wouldn't get past more than a few pages, you would be able to see that. So what I have instead of innate talent is I have storycraft, which I eventually, after a long, hardy effort on behalf of my teacher, began to learn. And what we're going to talk about today is the craft of storytelling as it relates to getting people to care about your characters. I said on Friday, but it's worth saying again, storytelling is all about manipulating people's emotions. And that sounds cold and jaded, but that doesn't make it any less true. So the thing about manipulating people's emotions is the first thing you have to understand is how people are wired emotionally. And what we're going to be talking about here is not necessarily any one specific person, but we're going to be talking about the general reaction of humanity and the way emotions function psychologically. Who here has been in a traffic accident of some kind? Some kind of collision? Okay, pretty much everybody. So that's kind of what I'm going to be using. Because when you're talking about writing somebody's emotional reaction to a scene, which we talked about scenes on Friday, the emotional reaction is something that's referred to as a sequel. Not because it's part 2, but because it follows what came before. So scenes, sequels are the 2 building blocks that you use to build a good story. Everything is either a scene or a sequel, one of the 2. So the way a sequel works is you need to one of the basic premises of storytelling is show, not tell. So when you're doing a sequel, you're showing your character's reaction to whatever it was that just happened. All right? And the first thing, okay, now I want you to imagine that this is your scene. you've just been in an auto accident, you know, like not an awful one where you're bleeding to death, but you know, an auto accident where it's like, oh crap. And your first reaction to that accident, and the first reaction of a human being to any kind of action, any kind of situation you run into, is always an emotional reaction. Now that isn't true on an everyday basis, or you know, on a moment-to-moment basis, because sometimes the emotional reaction is just a flicker and you don't care. But when there's big dramatic things happening, things that you want the reader to care about, your first reaction to something is always emotional. So you get in the traffic accident, you screed, crunch, broken glass, and then your reaction is, you know, what is your reaction? My God, I can't believe that idiot just did that. Or, holy crap, my plates are out of date. Or whatever it is that... There's this immediate reaction that you have that is an emotional one that happens before you have a chance to do anything else. There's that surge of adrenaline, there's the quick breathing, there's the grabbing onto the steering wheel and thinking, oh my God, or I'm gonna kill somebody, or oh my God, my kid's in the back seat. That emotional reaction comes first. So when you're planning your sequel, when you're planning your character's reactions to things, that's always the first thing you write is emotion. The second thing you run into, after you have a chance to flip out, that's when your brain kicks in and you start thinking about things. After that, first you'll go, oh my God, and then your brain starts kicking in. You start thinking things like, am I bleeding? Is somebody else hurt? Do I need to call the police? And that is only then does your intellect begin to have to take a say. There are a couple of different things that your intellect does. First, you will use logic to kind of address the immediate situation that's going on around you. And that's the instant stuff. Am I bleeding? Is somebody hurt? Can I get out of the car? Was there a cop watching that? Your logical stuff. The next thing that happens is the second part of reason is you review things that have happened and have gone on that day. What time is it? Oh my God, I'm never going to get to work on time. I'm going to lose my job. Or, how many other people are in that car? Is there still a beer bottle back there from last night? There's all these other things that go through your head. So this the next portion of the next phase of the situation is reason and review, logic and review. The next thing that you run into when you're running that emotional circuit is anticipation. What's going to happen next? Oh my God, the police are going to come. Oh my God, I'm going to have to call somebody. My insurance rates are going to go through the roof. You start thinking about the future. After you've logically considered the present and the past, you start thinking about the future as well. And that's the third phase of a good sequel, is thinking about what's coming up next. And the final phase of a sequel, and the important thing for your character is after you've gone through all these emotions, after you've gone through the reason, after you've worried about what's gonna happen up ahead of you, then you make a choice about what you're going to do, and the choice is the absolutely vital. That's the most important part of the sequel. Really, writing is all about, really, at the end of the day, it's all about your characters making choices and then facing the consequences of those choices. So, this is your outline. So if you want to write an outline for a sequel, and I highly recommend that you do, at least until you get used to doing it, just write emotion, reason, anticipation, choice, and be able to and know that you can fill in those parts for your characters. Now, you don't have to hit everything you don't have to hit each of those points in every single sequel you write, but you do have to hit them in that order, because that's the order that people go through things as human beings. If you do that, then you're going to be mirroring the psychological reaction of human beings to circumstances in general, and that's going to make your story much stronger, much better than it would be otherwise. Now, this is the most important part of writing. It's the most difficult part of writing. If you learn how to do this part, you'll be able to write books that people give a damn about, and that's what gets you broken in, and that's what gets you sales. So ideally, the way that this works, when you take them together, you remember where we took the scenes, and we had in the scene, we had the character's goal and the conflict, and then the outcome. Okay, we've got goal, conflict, and then the outcome or the setback, which feeds into a sequel. Okay, because something has just happened, and now your character is faced with reacting to that happen. You go through his emotions to this setback and outcome that he just got. You go through his reasoning over what just happened. You go through wondering, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And then he makes a choice. And when he makes the choice, now you have a new goal for your next scene. And that starts the cycle over again, back up here with a new goal. You can go through an entire story writing nothing but scene, sequel, scene, sequel, scene, sequel, and you will have a solid story. Now, and if you're a beginning writer, if you're writing a short story, I highly recommend that you do it that way, if for nothing else than to get practice at using that cycle in your favor. You don't have to do it that way, and depending on what kind of story you're writing, you're going to have a different weight, a different ratio of scenes to sequels, and you're going to have different amounts of the various portions of the sequel. And what you're writing is what determines where you spend most of your effort in the sequel. For example, I mean, if you're writing an action series, if you're writing Mac Bolan or The Executioner or something like that, you're not going to waste a lot of time on sequels. You're writing an action series. You're going to be mostly in scenes. Your sequels are going to be very quick, short, abbreviated. Mostly, you're going to be hitting the points of logic to get to your next, to get to your choice, to get to your next goal for the next scene. So in an action book, you're mostly doing scenes, so don't sweat the sequels so much. If you're doing a romance novel, romance novels run very, very heavy to the sequel. They run very, very heavy on emotion and on anticipation. So in a romance book, you're going to be hitting less. It's going to be less of a big deal to go over the reason of everything, and more to dwell on the emotions and the anticipation of what's going to happen next. Choices aren't going to be as huge a deal there because the point of the romance novel is to have those emotions, is to let the reader go through that again, that wonderful process of romance and falling in love. If you are writing a mystery novel, a lot of times you might not be hitting on the emotion very hard at all, and you're going to be much more focused on the reason and the logic and the review of what's happened before, because for those kind of novels, for a police procedural or a novel like that, just the facts, man, that's what we're dealing with. When you're doing a horror novel, horror novels are all about emotion. They're all about making the choices that get you killed, or whatever other, whatever other thing have happened to the characters. If you're writing suspense is all about anticipation and building anticipation, and so that's where you're going to be hitting your heavy portion of the sequel. And if you're and that's basically you've got to get in. I'm giving you a very rough outline of how you do it. I'm kind of showing you the primary colors here, and your job as a writer is to get in and start working with these colors and start mixing your own blends to find out exactly what it is that's going to be good for your story. Okay, all of that said, you can see sequels in action in virtually everything. If you take a look at Star Wars at episode, it's episode 1. We all know that. It's not actually 4. There was only one Star Wars trilogy. Amen. Right? Although I don't know if you guys have ever seen episode 1.1, The Phantom Edit. Is there anybody here who's seen that one besides me? Yeah, The Phantom Edit. They took episode 1 and all they did was cut material from episode 1. And I think they wound up chopping out about 25 minutes of the episode of the movie. And what's left is really, really fast and cool. It's like, okay, this is actually kind of neat. It's got way less Jar Jar. But yeah, I just love it. I love that. This is a good example of good editing. You know the scene where Obi-Wan walks up to the robots and he says, we're not Obi-Wan, but Qui-Gon walks up to the robots and says, we're taking these people to Coruscant. What? To Coruscant. Wait, that doesn't compute, you're under arrest. And instead, well, the Phantom Edit, and then Qui-Gon starts a fight. And instead of the Phantom Edit, it's just Qui-Gon comes walking up and the robot says, halt. And it cuts immediately to Qui-Gon drawing his lightsaber and slicing it in half. It's like, okay, that's much more Jedi. I appreciate that much more. It was just so shocking. It's like, all right, sudden violence, I appreciate that. Why debate the frickin' droid? Okay, sorry, side tangent. But when you can see sequels in action go and watch A New Hope sometime. And you can actually just sit there and write sequel and go through with the outline from goals or with the outline from scenes and from sequels. And you can just follow it, and it just goes scene, sequel, scene, sequel, scene, sequel. They're coming off the Death Star, and they're coming off the Death Star, and they just fought off the TIE fighters, or they've just gotten out. Obi-Wan's just sacrificed himself to Darth Vader. That end scene. Yeah, thank you, my Lord Sith. And that's the end of the scene. That they escape from the station, and. Then the next scene is Luke just sitting there crushed and lay up in the blanket around him, and that's the sequel that you get from it. That's Luke's reaction, and that's the emotional part of the scene is Luke just sitting there devastated, and then when Luke saying I can't believe he's gone, and that's where you're getting that emotional reaction from it. And then Solo pops in. It's like, hey there, buddy. And Solo pops in as reason and review, and says, hey there, buddy. We're not out of this yet. And oh yeah, there's still a story going on. We still have an escape to pull off. And that gets it back to the next scene where the goal is to get away from these TIE fighters. I mean, that's just that's one example, but you can see this everywhere. If you watch The Fugitive is another very good example. Of a movie that uses these scenes and then in between these frantic escape scenes and these frantic running around scenes, you have these moments of Harrison Ford where he's going through all this pain, trying to figure out what's going on next. So that's sequels in a nutshell. That's how you do it. It's one of these things. That is very simple. It's like I was saying a few minutes ago. Simple, not easy. How do you carve a statue? Well, you get a block of stone, and then you carve away everything that isn't the statue. And it's simple, just not easy. So sequels, practice them. Emotion, reason, anticipation, choice. And all you have to do is go scene, sequel. You can go all the way through. And by doing this, you're going to create characters that people understand. You won't necessarily create characters that people like, but they'll get it. Tricking people into liking your characters is a little bit harder, and that's not something that I can teach you. That's something you're going to have to go out and practice and learn for yourself, but totally doable. And the first step towards liking somebody is to understand them, and that's what this story structure is going to do. It's going to make sure that people understand. It's going to make sure, and for you, it's going to make sure that you're staying on your plot because you're staying focused on what your characters are doing. Real quick. I also want to go over story questions. Story question is the first thing you write. The very first thing you write before you sit down to start doing your story, you want to write a story question. And there's a real simple format to it, okay? So write this down, okay? Okay, when? And then in parentheses, because this is the part that's going to change from story to story, something happens that changes the status quo. Okay, then now the next set of parentheses. Okay, that takes a minute to write down. But when something happens, there's an event that happens, it changes things that are going on. And this is when you start the story, is at that story-changing event. Your protagonist. That's in the next set of parentheses. Your protagonist, whatever his name is. Glad you could join us this morning, Julia. Yeah, well, I hear you had a busy zombie night, so yeah. Okay, your protagonist sets out to accomplish goal. Okay, accomplish goal goes in parentheses as well. Okay, that's the first part, it's the first sentence of the story question. Now, the second sentence of the story question is, but will he succeed when antagonist, that goes in parentheses, gets in his way and tries to stop him? And it's that simple. When your character encounters this life-changing event, he sets out to accomplish something. But will he succeed when somebody else gets in his way and tries to stop him? When Frodo discovers that the ring he inherits from his grandfather is actually the Ring of Power, the key to defeating a force that is about to devour Middle-earth, he sets out to destroy the ring. But will he succeed when the ring raids and Gollum and 5 zillion orcs and a bunch of giant spiders and everybody else gets in his way and tries to stop him from getting the ring to where it needs to be destroyed? That's the question. That's the story question of the Lord of the Rings. And then by the time you get to the big climax of the story, everything you're working towards is the answer to the story question. Okay? Will he succeed when all those things get in his way? Yes. Lord of the Rings. and that's how it's done. And the answer, and really you want the answer to your story, okay, you can write books that are horrible tragedies where everybody dies, and sometimes those are successful. But honestly, horrible tragedies where everybody dies life is like that. While some people like to write to mirror life, some people write escapism. I like story questions that answer yes, more or less. When the vampires of the Red Courts abduct Harry Dresden's daughter and threaten to destroy her, he sets out to rescue her. But will he be able to do so? Even though the price may be at the cost of his own life. Yes. But the point is you've got this question, and everything you do in the book, everything you write in the book, whether it's a scene, whether it's a sequel, needs to be driving towards answering that question. If you are not driving towards answering that question, you are fucking up, and your story is going to go off track. Keep that in mind. Everything you do needs to be driving towards the answer to that story question. I cannot emphasize that strongly enough. This is what aspiring writers, this is where they almost always invariably go off track. They start doing things that have nothing to do with the story question. Now, can you write scenes that have nothing to do with a story question? Yes, absolutely. But you need to learn how to write the book that is completely focused on this story question. If you can't write that book, if you don't know the rules, you don't know when and how to break them effectively. Learn the rules so you can break them. I couldn't believe it when I found that was a Zen proverb that came out a couple of thousand years ago or something like that. Learn the rules so that you can break them properly. And it's true. And this is another one of those stories another one of those instances where it's true. While you're writing it, everything you do, especially as you're getting started, needs to be a drive towards answering that question. Storytelling is all about getting from that question at the beginning to the answer at the end, and that answer at the end is your big climax, your big showdown. And everything you do in that story, everything you do for the whole first 90% of your manuscript needs to be driving towards that last 10%. If you can't do that, you aren't going to have a story that people care about. So yeah, there you go. Go out and become bestsellers. I've given you the easy part, okay? Now comes the hard part. You've got to practice it. You've got to put your butt in the chair and start typing. And that's the tough part. That's the part that's up to you. I will say this, though, about breaking into writing. Mostly, breaking into writing, it's not about having a lot of talent, because I did not have a lot of talent. It's not really about knowing somebody who's in the industry, although that never hurts. It's not about having a muse. It's not about being able to use poetic language. It's mostly about being stubborn enough to keep your butt in the damn chair and keep working. Breaking into the industry is something that is going to happen for people every year. They have to take newbies in every year, because if they don't, all their old writers will die. And they know this, so they get newbies every year. Every year, every publisher has got a certain number of slots reserved for newbies. So the aspiring writers, you guys are not competing against me and George R. R. Martin and Pat Rothfuss. You're not. You're only competing against the other newbies. This is sort of the this goes back. This is a bear proverb. You know, you're being chased by a bear. You don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than the guy next to you. And that's where you are as newbie writers too. You don't have to be faster than, you know, the biggest people in the industry. You just have to be faster than the other noobs. And if you work at it long enough, eventually those other noobs will drop out and you will be in. It's an endurance race. So what you do as a newbie writer, and the way that you break in, is that you focus on, okay, there's not people behind me anymore. I'm a little freaked out by that. Did they go out this door? Okay. See, now somebody can come in that door. I'm going to be itchy the whole rest of the time. Sorry, where was I? Oh, other noobs. The thing you focus on as a beginning writer are the small details that are going to be tiebreakers between you and other noobs. When you are writing a summary of your novel, you have got to be able to write the summary of your novel in the form of that story question. If you can't do that, your novel's not focused enough, and you're not organized enough as a writer to be taken seriously as a professional. When editors write me and say, I need a synopsis of this book, I send them the story question. It's 2 sentences. This is the synopsis of the book. Bam. When they wrote me further, I did this not 6 months ago when I wrote up the synopsis for the first 3 books of the new steampunk series. You know, I got those written up, sent them off to the editor, 2 sentences each, no problem. The editor knew exactly the kind of story I was going to be telling. They were happy with it. You do this as beginning writers, that's an important thing to do. Editors do not want pages and pages and pages of you telling them what your story's about. You give it to them in 2 sentences, that's professional. You know, that's something they're going to be look at and go, oh, okay, they've got an idea what's going on. I'm not kidding, I'm not lying here. So when you're trying to break in, you know, story question is serious. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. I use it for pitches, I use it for synopses, I use it to help write cover copy. I use a story question as the basis of cover copy for the back of the books. You know, that's all of this stuff is stuff that is not complicated. You just have to do it, but it's hard to make it all work together, and it takes practice to make it all work together. So anyway, eventually, so that's the other thing to keep in mind about breaking in. Breaking in, don't have to compete against me, just have to compete against other newbies. Once you've broken in, as far as I'm concerned, you're still not competing against me. Other people who write really good, really successful novels do not hurt me as a writer. Patrick Rothfuss writing a successful novel does not hurt me. All he can possibly do is help me, because if he gets enough fans and says enough good things about me, then my books start to circulate into his fandom and vice versa. Somebody else writing a brilliant novel, even if they're writing it in the urban fantasy genre, they're not competing with me. They're helping me make the genre cooler, and that's the way it works. So really, the competition only happens early on. You guys are the ones that are engaged in the competition. Once you're here, then it's just, okay, come on, let's help me make things cooler with your own flavor of cool. Okay, I think that's pretty much all I had for lesson. But we could talk about it, and if you've got questions about it or comments about it, then this is the time to do it, and we'll discuss how it works, or we'll discuss other things about the Dresden Files or whatever you like.
So when you said the 2 questions, that's like in the back of the book, what is that the question almost every time? Will such and such survive and fight off the evil?
Well, will he succeed in his goal, which you stated in the first part of the sentence? Yeah. Will he succeed when the antagonist gets in his way? Because you've got to have an antagonist. If you like, we can talk a little bit about protagonists and antagonists, if you want to do that, because it's kind of important. But
how early is it important to let people know what your story question is, or who the antagonist will turn out to be?
How important is it to let your people know what your story question is and who the antagonist will be early? If it were me, I'd do it. I mean, when you're first getting into the business, especially, the earlier the better. If you can do it in the first sentence, well done. You know, what's the first sentence of the Dark Tower? The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Boom. You know what's going on right there. I mean, that's storycraft. That's elegant. It's putting it tells you exactly what's going on in one sentence, in one simple sentence, and sets you up for the entire series. And that's Stephen King is a master of the craft, and that's one of the things. That's an example of how to do that early on.
Almost all of my ideas start from a character, not a scene. How do you translate that so that you can get them into that scene or into that world?
You start with the situation that changes that character's world, that changes whatever it is that's happening to that character. That's how people ask, how do you know where to start the story? You start with the situation that that gives the character a goal. You know, Harry Dresden starts off the scene with the series in his office doing his regular day stuff. When Murphy calls up and gets him involved or when the client shows up that gets him involved in this case that is going to be the first case that sets him off on this big story, and that's where I started that. I started the series. The first thing I did was put Harry Dresden together, and then I said, okay, let's figure out the world he lives in. Let's figure out his past and future. Let's figure out where I'm going to start this story. And where you start the story is where the big change happens that sets him off on the adventure.
You talked about a sequence or something that happens in the sequel that happens after it. Would you say there's like a third thing, like some sort of anticipation that builds up to the event that changes the character? Like, would that be some sort of a third part of it?
Yeah. I mean, sequels are where you show changes in character happening. Changes in character ultimately have to be reflected in your choice, because you can feel whatever you want about some situation, but what speaks about what you actually think about that situation and what kind of person you actually are is the choice you make, the action you take. Because you can say that you're for instance, you can say you're a libertarian all you want, but if you go to the polls and don't vote libertarian, then you kind of got to question that about a person. So, I mean, honestly, the way you show that, this is where we get into showing, not telling. The way you show who your character is you show him going through this process. You show him making that choice, and that tells you who that guy is.
Now, how do you use descriptive bits, like describing our department, things like that?
Descriptive bits are, I mean, okay, that's, depending on what kind of story you're writing, you're going to have much more or much less description. Depending on your style, much more or much less description. It's a really interesting exercise to go through and try and write a story with as little as possible or with as much description as possible. Usually, whenever I'm writing a description, what I want to describe is, first of all, I want to create a character that sticks in the person's head. And so the description is really just an excuse to use words that I choose to associate with one specific character so that those words always are kind of attached to that character. Those are called tags. When you choose a specific word that's going to go with a specific character. So the Dresden Files, for instance, Murphy's tags are short, cute, blonde. And if I'm ever talking about short, cute, blonde, I'm talking about Murphy because that's the tags I've assigned to her. There are other characters that are cute. There are other characters that are short, but short, cute, blonde is Murphy. I mean, it's just like that with every character that I write. There are certain words that I associate with that character, so that when I start using those words, the reader automatically goes, right, I know exactly who he's talking about. Even if I'm not going with the character's name a lot, I can start describing a character when I come back into a book, and if it's a familiar character, people know who I'm going to be talking about even before I get to their name. That's that's something called character tags, and that's something that you always should, when you're writing up your character sheet, it's something that you always associate with your character. You pick specific words that are going to be those characters' words, and you use them mostly with that character. What's that?
Do that for faces as well.
Indeed, you would. So whenever you go to McNally's Pub, I talk about there being 13 tables. I talk about there being low ceiling fans. I talk about there being a meandering bar and columns in the room. And those are just specific words or specific short key phrases that will always key the reader in. Okay, I know where we are. I'm sorry, you're going to have to speak up. Hey, could we close the door if there's nobody walking through it?
On Friday, we talked a bit about the importance of dialogue. I have a problem with stilted dialogue. How do you avoid it?
How do you avoid stilted dialogue? You practice it, and the way you practice it is you try writing a story, try writing a scene where everybody speaks in 5 words or less. Because in real life, everybody speaks in 5 words or less. And I remember to this day a conversation that I had with somebody that I was mentoring, and it was like, I told her that, and she says, 5 words or less? I said, yeah. She says, nobody talks like that. Sure they do. No, they don't. And that's and really that's how we communicate as people. I mean, I'm up here spewing out long sentences because I've got a podium. Yeah, I'm the main character. I get to do that. But that's how you avoid stilted dialogue. Is you start writing the briefest dialogue you can, and then you eventually start to understand. Okay, how can I convey as much as possible in as few words as possible. Even when I'm writing dialogue, often I throw grammar completely out the window because that's not how people talk. We don't talk with good grammar. We talk with good communication, and that's what really needs to come across.
Okay, so you said that you like to end chapters wherever it will make the beta reader scream the most. and you've also gone a lot into scenes equal scenes. Do you end chapters after the scene, or do you end chapters after the sequel?
Do I end chapters after the scene, or do I end chapters after the sequel? Because I like to end chapters wherever the beta readers scream the most. That's the question. One of the best places to end the chapter is right after the setback, or right after the horrible something that happens at the end of the scene. That's kind of my preferred place to end the chapter. The oh no moment. Another great place to end the chapter is after the emotion of a sequel. And as far as I'm concerned, and this is another mistake that most beginning writers make, most beginning writers don't go enough into the emotion during sequels. Because it's in the emotions that you're going to grab the audience. It's emotion that is going to rope in the reader's attention and interest. What you're really trying to do is get the reader emotionally invested in your story, and that's the primary place to do it. So that's where most newbie writers don't spend enough time. Because we're all concerned about, when you get started, and I've been there, you're concerned about, well, how do I build this? How do I keep the story on track? How do I get this to the end? And so you tend to be, when you hit these sections of the scene, the aspiring writers tend to be focused on the logic of it to be able to keep the story going one step after another. And that is important. But where you're going to start making your breakthrough, where you're going to start getting the attention of editors, is when you also are able to work with these emotions and to go into that. So that's something to practice doing.
So how do you deal with characters that are intentionally, due to the character, emotionally fatigued, somewhat robotic, or maybe just the cop who's just dealing with the facts? So you don't have a lot of emotional investment to work with, even though that's a primary character.
Characters like that are typically not successful. When you're writing a character, there has got to be emotional investment, even if that emotional investment is something that you're touching on only lightly, or only indirectly, or only in subtext. But it's got to be something that's there, or you kind of look at the character and go, nah. You need to be able to feel something for them. You need to see them in pain. Not that I ever do that. You need to see them. You need to see them happy. You need to see them grimly determined. You know, you need to see something from that character that is more than just a bot. Data, the character with no emotion, you know, the android character is driven and is on an absolutely single-minded, fanatical search to become more human. That's the emotion that you get from him, is he wants more out of his life than what he has. And that's what appeals to us as people, as we look at that. And you know, he wants to be more like us. He's an outsider, and he wants to be more on the inside. That's an emotional drive in that character. It's a subtextual one because there's nothing overt in that emotion. But inside that, Data is somebody who has a deep longing to belong and to feel love. And that's why we love the guy. Yeah. How can what?
Can you make time the antagonist? So can they do it in time before time runs out?
Okay. Time itself is never the antagonist. You've got to have somebody who is getting in the way, or your story's gonna have all kinds of problems. You can do fancier things like that once you learn the basics. But when you're getting started, just have a villain. Just have a Snidely Whiplash. Get used to using those guys. Now, I do agree that having time as a factor is great, and that's called a ticking clock. And ticking clocks are one of my favorite things to do. And I started off, before you get to the end of chapter 2 of the next Dresden book, you find out he's got 3 days before the parasite in his head is going to kill him. And he's got to get the job done by then. And Mab's is not going to let him get help until the job is done. So that's ticking clocks are great devices, and I love having them. You've got to get it done before this. Anything you can do, absolutely anything you can do to put more pressure on your protagonist is good. Whether it's a ticking clock, whether it's an outside interest that is adding more pressure to them, you know, he's got bills due or whatever. Anything you can do to make life worse and to turn up the temperature on your protagonist, do it. Now, I know I've often heard the writing proverb of you know, a story is chasing your character up a tree and throwing rocks at him and setting the tree on fire and then chopping the tree down, you know, etc. That's a bad proverb. Don't listen to that. Because in that proverb, your character's stuck in the goddamn tree, and that's not very interesting. He's not really doing anything. You've got to have characters that are actively doing things, that have goals that they are going after. The character's not the guy who's stuck in the tree. The character's the tree. You know, he needs to be somebody who is getting stuff done, who the situation is about him, about her. I'm using him just because, you know, I'm a dude. But that is what you're seeking to do. You're seeking to have this, to show this character in action. And even if you're not writing an action book, characters are in action in a good story. They are going after. They're trying to win the affection of the object of their desire. They are trying. You know, they're trying to accomplish something. They're trying to find the killer. Even if it's not a specific action book, you could be writing a cozy mystery. Your character still has to be driven in action.
How does one find quality data readers? I mean,
How does one find what?
quality data readers. I want people who are smarter than me and better at craft than I am. I want them to tear my stuff up so I can learn. So how does one find I mean, there are plenty of people out there that are happy to read and maybe offer a critique, but you end up with critiques like, yeah, that was really cool, what's the next piece? Not valuable.
Right. Okay. The thing about getting feedback is there's two ways to get feedback. To get feedback from other writers who know about the craft and can tear your craft to shreds, which can be helpful, and to get feedback from the readers who you're aiming at to begin with. I think that's another mistake a lot of people make, is they spend too much time getting feedback from other writers who are completely different members of other writers are not your demographic. They're not who you're going to aim your story at ultimately. So what you have to do is you have to develop, okay, this is how I've got things set up with my beta readers. Because I don't ask them to read for copy editing or grammar or anything like that. That's not what I care about. When you're working with a publisher, you've got people who are going to do that anyway. What you want from your beta readers is you want to get their reaction to what you wrote. So on my beta list, I've got a real simple question, a real simple format for it. What did you like? You know, tell me about the things that you liked in this chapter. Tell me about the things you did not like in this chapter. Do you have any questions that have arisen from this chapter? Because if you leave a plot hole and it's do you have any questions part, that is so annoying. Because if you haven't done your job, if you haven't correctly shown the reason and logic of your characters doing stuff, beta readers will have these questions that will show you these gaping holes in your plot or in your logic, and you just want to kill them when they do that because they've pointed out your imperfection, and that's never comfortable.
No, it is very valuable.
It is extremely valuable. The more the comments from my beta readers annoy me, the more valuable I know they are. So I have to stomp away and pout for a while, and then come back and then thank them for making me stomp away and pout. But yeah, I mean, what you need to do is you have to develop the capacity to look at these responses from your readers and to figure out, oh, I'm not showing them, you know, they'll say something like, I don't understand why this character is behaving that way. Well, I don't understand why this character is acting like such a jerk. Oh, well, I have not given them sufficient proof of why this guy should be behaving in this way. I need to go back and tinker with this previous sequel to show him, you know, to show his reasoning in being such a jerk. Or I need to point out some factor that is going to make it clear why he's annoyed this morning. You know, or I need to remember that for later use so that I can reveal, aha, this is why he was being such a jerk. And you know, that is what is extremely valuable. What you get from their comments is not so much they're going to tell you what's wrong with your book as they're going to give you a list of symptoms, and then you need to be able to diagnose it and go in and say, this is why they're reacting the way they're reacting. And the process of doing that kind of teaches you a lot about people. And as writers, that's kind of one of the things you have to be a student of human nature. You have to understand why people get to the places they get.
Well, when you incorporate the beta's feedback like that, fill in holes, etc., do you send it back to them for them to reread it, or do you just count that as done and send it to a different reader to see if the reaction comes back to you again after the correction?
I'll send the book. I send the book to about a dozen or so, plus or minus, beta readers, chapter by chapter, all at once, and then I take in the aggregate reaction of all of them. And some of my readers aren't quite as sharp as the others because I value the cache of the readers who aren't quite as sharp just as much as I do the cache of the ones who are, and I want to be able to communicate to everybody.
Right.
So I've got readers who are highly educated, I've got readers who are not terribly educated, I've got readers who are very intelligent, those who aren't, I've got some who are very articulate and understanding, and some who are a little bit more dense about human nature, because I want to be able to talk to as many people as I can. So I'm able to see, okay, wait a minute, I need to be able to show this a little bit more clearly, I need to be able to make this character a little bit more understandable. Or I've made this character a little too understandable and I need to fog him a little bit, so that he's more fun toward the end of the story.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Well, I kind of had a two-part question. I was wondering if you had any literary influences for your work. I read on your website that you were into gaming.
Who did I read before I started writing? Probably the single biggest inspiration would have been Laurel Hamilton's early books, because I just loved the hell out of them. And they kind of... Okay, random squeaky-wheeled cart come in, squeaky-wheeled cart go out. I'm not sure what's up with that, but okay. Just sort of random noise making, thank you. Probably the single biggest inspiration would have been Laurel Hamilton and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because these were stories that I just loved and breathed. And Laurel Hamilton's books kind of went off in a different direction, and than they'd started in, and I was upset by that. But one of the ways that I got over it was by saying, well, I'll make my own stories that do what I want them to do. And that was one of the things I did. because you've got to be able to write your own story. And you know, if somebody else's story is not your story, don't get upset about it. Just make your own, because then it'll be exactly like you want it. You know, which is, you know, a good and a bad thing, because you know, now I've got to answer for everything. Now it's all mine. I can't blame it on anybody else. That's the downside of being the complete creator and being in complete control of the story. I can't blame it on any TV show. I can blame on somebody else. You know, there was all these other people there.
Did you ever read
Did
Heinlein?
I ever read Heinlein?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot. I think I read I, Robot. I think I read the book Friday, because the cover had the real deep cleavage picture on it back in the day.
The reason I am asking is because on your blog, you have advice to writers, and I've enjoyed this panel very, very much. But one of the things you put up there is TANFL, and I was not clear on whether you understood that that was something thematically used throughout Heinlein's work, and that he is pretty much the father, one of the fathers of science fiction. And I was, maybe you didn't know, I just wasn't sure, but it's called Tan Stopper because there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah, well, I heard it. There ain't no free lunch, because it was just a saying in my family, in my part of the country. There ain't no free lunch.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story, say, but it was really used by Heinlein. And so when I saw that, I was like a little sad. So I just wanted you to know that that's really his work, and it's not TANFL, it's Tan Stopper.
That's not Heinlein's work. That's just human nature. That's just truth.
Used thematically throughout his work,
Okay.
and he is one of the fathers of science fiction.
Well, indeed.
And if there's no such thing as a free lunch, one of the things that you pay for when you go throughout life is you pay homage to the people who came before you, the people who carved the way out for you. You're one of those people, evidently. You're one of those people who's making, you know, for other writers, and you're educating other writers, and that's just a wonderful thing. But Heinlein did that for you, and for you to take.
Heinlein did that so that he could pay his mortgage for the same reason that I write. He was a professional writer.
I mean, but he did the same, you know.
Ma'am, I believe everybody has heard your point, ma'am. May we have the session back?
You can have the session back. But when you use his work.
Ma'am? Ma'am? Really?
That was a polite way of him saying shut up.
No, she's got a point. Okay, she's got a point. Heinlein did write before me, but he was not the first one to note that you can't get through life for free. You know, I think we could go back to Aristotle to hit on that one, and I think there's something about ants and grasshoppers, which came several thousand years before. I mean, we can jump back and forth on that, but I think you'd also go to Brandon Sanderson, who I don't know if any of you guys have read Way of Kings, but there's a beautiful discussion about arguing about who came up with something first, and the irony of that.
Like I said, he used it throughout his books thematically.
Okay, cool.
It's part of the themes of his whole entire body of work. And so when it gets used by another speculative fiction type writer, I would expect or anticipate that some recognition of that be made.
Truth has no copyright.
Jim, what kind of advice do you think, as you're giving presentations like this and talking to aspiring writers, what do you think is the hardest piece of advice for aspiring writers to take? What is it you get the most of?
Ooh, the hardest piece of advice to take? Oh God, I think it probably varies from writer to writer. The hardest piece of advice that I had to take was my writing teacher thought that I needed to, instead of writing epic fantasy, which was all that I was writing, because that's what I was going to do, I needed to be writing something else. I needed to be writing, she thought that I needed to be writing maybe urban fantasy. And she said, you're always talking about, you know, when you bring up examples in class, you're always bringing up stuff from, you know, these Laurel Hamilton books or from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Maybe you need to write an urban fantasy. And I'm like, no, I don't need to write urban fantasy. I'm an epic fantasy writer. So it wasn't until that semester I decided to prove her wrong that I even tried it, and that was when Dresden Files. But it's going to vary from writer to writer. One of the things that really, the biggest thing is just is sit down and write. That's one of the things that most aspiring writers you have the hardest time convincing them of. One of the other things people get hung up on is they want to write one story and then keep rewriting that story and writing the same story. And you don't learn a lot when you do that. You need to write your story and then get done with that and get on to the next story.
Is that about perfectionism, or like feeling like I feel more comfortable writing than necessarily putting it out there?
Or getting locked on to this one story that you think is going to be the story that's going to do everything for you. Because I was sure that first epic fantasy I was writing was going to be the story that was going to do everything because it was awesome, and it wasn't awesome. It took me a long time to realize that, the non-awesomeness of it. I thought the Dresden Files thing was completely ridiculous when I started it. I was doing it as an intellectual exercise and this, this sense of arrogance and egotism towards my teacher. And it was only after a while that I realized, hey, I've got a hold of something really cool here. That's another thing. It's different from writer to writer. But read a lot. I can't tell you how many writers I run into who don't read. Go read everybody. Read things that are not your genre. Read things that don't make you comfortable. Read things that are not your favorite thing. Try and understand. Read successful writers and try and understand what it is that's made them that way. Try and analyze their craft and figure out, this is I can see this, and you'll begin to see these points of commonality in all these writers. In the level of language that they employ. A lot of writers, they think you've got to use fancy language. It's just not true. You go look at the New York Times bestsellers list, and virtually every book on it will be written at an 8th grade level or less, and which is a ridiculous standard anyway, because the way they calculate the grade level of any given piece of writing is they count the average number of letters in the word. Just using longer words makes it a higher grade level. Yeah, that's valuable. Thank you. All the really, really important words are short ones, and they have one syllable in them. Stuff like love, faith, truth. They're short words. They're not complicated words.
One of the guiding principles for me was what Henry James said in The Art of Fiction: "Leave one upon whom nothing is lost." And so I'm just wondering, in your life experience, have there been specific events, or first of all, does your experience validate that for you? And also, are there any specific experiences or details that you are conscious and then you see them end up in your writing? To what degree does that happen?
You can't avoid having that happen, I think, as a writer. When you start writing, when you get in these sequels and you start writing about people's emotions, the only way you can do that is to write about the stuff that you've felt and to draw upon your own experiences to try and convey what those emotions are. I can write effectively for Harry Dresden about pain because I've suffered from migraines since I was 9 years old, and I know about dealing with pain. I can handle that. I can write other things about loss or about being worried about your children because these are things that I've felt in my own life. I highly encourage you to get out and to experience things that have an emotional effect on you and to take note of it when it happens. If there's a movie that makes you hop up and down in your chair with excitement or makes you cry or makes you furious, go back and look at that and figure out why it made you hop up in your chair or why it made you cry or why it made you furious. Go out and experience things. Go out someplace a few miles away from a city where there's not a lot of ambient light and just sit down sometime and wait for the dark to come on at sundown and kind of experience that feeling of creeping. Because you get out there in the woods and it starts getting dark, it's scary. I mean, you go out there by yourself, it's creepy. And that's a useful experience to take with you to go when you're writing. Figure out the things that trigger these emotions in you and cause you to feel stuff. And because when you do that, and when you go and experience this stuff, you're gonna have something to take with you when you're writing, and work it out.
How do you not make your co-cast or your co-characters stronger than your main characters, or do you kind of
Okay, two totally different questions. Let's start with the first one. How do you make supporting cast not overwrite your main character? Okay. There are two factors that go into that. One, word count. Whoever gets the most word count is your main character. The more word count somebody gets, the more important they are in your story, and that's all there is to it. That's who your reader is going to have emotional investment with, is whoever you spend the most time with. It's sort of like being a parent, you know. Love is spelled T-I-M-E, and if you don't spend time on the things you love, then there's no investment there. So that's the main way you do it, is you spend more time with your main character than anybody else. The other way you do it is you show more of the emotion and more of the reasoning and more of the investment of your main character than anybody else. As a writer, there's kind of a corollary proverb to go along with it. Love is spelled P-A-I-N. Whoever gets hurt the most is the main character. And that pretty much goes across the board as well. Okay, was that both of them? Did I answer both? No, the other question was anti-heroes.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't like using hero, anti-hero in terms of storycraft because it's not really useful. I use protagonist and antagonist. Your antagonist is your central character, or your protagonist is your central character. That's who you're following. Your antagonist is whoever is getting in the way. And you can have, main antagonists and sub-antagonists. In the early Dresden Files, Murphy is not Dresden's ally. She's a minor antagonist who gets in his way and screws him up a bunch of the times. She's not an enemy, she's not a villain, but she is an antagonist. In the same way, your protagonist can be an anti-hero, but it really doesn't reflect on storycraft so much. You're just showing this character, and you're showing different traits and different emotions than you would expect in your typical archetypical hero. But as far as storycraft goes, no difference.
So how much research do you do? Do you just kind of wing it, or do you actually find consultants to get information from?
How much research do I do? More and more as I get more into my career, more and more research, because there's more and more people to call me on my bullshit. Really, I mean, it matters. That's the perils in drawing from your life experiences, is that sometimes your life experience is not going to be what everybody else's has been. So you do a lot of research. Fortunately, the internet has made doing research much, much easier than it used to be, to the point where when in the short story where Michael's daughter gets kidnapped, by the misguided priest, I went and found a specific building in Chicago and got on Google Street Views and went all the way around the building and did all this figuring and figured out exactly which street lights would need to be out to obscure the top of the building, to the point where a Chicago SWAT officer came up and said, "I need to know who you talked to about that setup, because that's a serious security concern." And I said, "I didn't talk to anybody. I used Google Street View and figured it out." And he goes, "Oh God, I hate the internet." And and that's one level of research. Last night I was researching, and I love it because you can just go to Google and say, "How do I set a broken radius?" And figure out, okay, this is what's going to have to happen for this character to get back in shape. And I'm not saying Harry's arm got horribly broken by getting hit with his own wizard staff, but things happen. And but yeah, I mean, you've got to do a considerable amount of research. You've got to get into a broad background of whatever it is you're doing, and you've got to give yourself a good general grounding. Once you've gotten yourself a good general grounding, then you'll have your footing. You'll know where you need to hit more research. One of the things I always recommend to people, if you're going to be writing any kind of action or crime series, anything that's going to be set in, more or less the modern world, there was a series of books called the How Done It series that was put out by Writer's Digest, I think in the early 90s. And the How Done It books are just amazing. It's stuff like The Writer's Guide to Poison, And it's an A through Z of all these poisons. It's cross-referenced with all the different side effects that potential poisons can have. And I mean, it's brilliant. There's one that is just nothing but police procedure. The Writer's Guide to Police Procedure, and so on. And it just gives you a good general grounding in these various areas. Get out and if you don't know about martial arts, go find a karate school. Go talk to a martial artist. If you've got questions, you can learn the answers. It's all out there. I mean, if you've got access to the internet, if you can Google something, you can learn about anything you want to. It's awesome. Yeah.
What do you think of third person and first person in the same story?
Third person, I avoid. Okay, does it work to have third person and first person in the same story? I don't like it. I think that when you're going through the story, when you switch that point of view, every time you do it, you're creating a road bump for the reader. You're creating a speed bump where the reader has to stop and go, oh, wait a minute, okay, now we're doing something completely different. And there are some great writers who I love who commit that sin, and it bugs the hell out of me every time. Because, not so much because it's that terrible a thing, but because as a writer, like I said on Friday, I'm the writer who wants the language to be something transparent, for the reader to get the story without really even noticing that the words are there. That's my goal as a writer. And by switching gears on the reader like that, you're forcing them every time they hit that switch to notice that the words are there. And I think that's you're spoiling the illusion. You're knocking them out of that sense of I'm in my virtual story world here. Writing is virtual reality if you're doing it well. Telling a good storytelling is the oldest virtual reality. And if you're doing things that throw people out of that virtual reality, you're sabotaging yourself, and you're not going to, while it's not necessarily a killer, you're sandbagging yourself, and why would you do that? So.
You talked about burnout and having multiple projects. Do you actually see it as helpful to have multiple projects so that no matter what, you're continuously writing? When you hit that point where you just can't hit the main character again, it hurts too much.
Thinking about it, I don't think I've ever gotten to the point where it hurts too much to hit the character. Maybe that says something about me, I don't know. But I do occasionally get sick of the guy. And it's always helpful to me to be able to go somewhere else and write stories about somebody else, doing something else. Switching over to writing third-person stories because it's a much different form of storytelling than first-person. There's so much more play in the line. There's so many better ways to hang yourself with it that way. Because when you switch over to third-person, it gives you many more options as a storyteller to do things. So it's great to go back. But then when you go back to first-person, after you've done third-person for a while, and after you're tired of tripping over the rope over and over, you go back to first person, it's like, oh, I love it. It's like driving a sports car. There's no questions here. I just down the street. And then, but then by the time you get sick of being cooped up in the sports car with Harry Dresden, you can get back, over into third person where you can go off road and do anything you want. Yeah, I mean, it's fun that way. I think it is important. It's very important that you keep writing. And anything you do that keeps you writing is good for you as a writer. Underline that. Anything you do that keeps you writing is good for you as a writer. So I can actually prove to you mathematically on a spreadsheet that I do better as a writer when I play video games. So, professionally speaking, I have got to be online playing League of Legends tonight. I'm sorry. It's part of my discipline. And technically it would be tax deductible. Yeah, I hate filling out that paperwork though. Yes, Lord Vader.
Speaking of video games, what are your favorite games to play?
What are my favorite
Games.
What are my favorite games?
Yeah.
I always have a first-person shooter that I'm playing currently. It's Battlefield. It's the latest Battlefield. I've gotten into League of Legends lately, so I'm down with League of Legends, and I've been playing that for a while. And then I always have at least one MMORPG that I'm on. Currently, I'm playing Champions Online, And yeah, just like the night before I came here, Harry Dresden got in a duel with Lopan. That was pretty cool. Harry Dresden versus Lopan. It was awesome. Harry Dresden did. It was an online role-playing game. Come on. He thrashed around a while and then he died. You know, that was that. I blew him off the side of a skyscraper. So.
Also, another question: will Harry Dresden ever join the dark side?
Will Harry Dresden ever join the dark side? Given who's asking it, yes, my lord. That's really kind of been one of the whole questions of the overall story, and the story's not over yet, and so I'm not going to ruin it for you by answering it.
Okay, so I know Harry in particular, because you only see the world through his eyes. And sometimes he's fairly emotionally compromised, and he becomes kind of an unreliable narrator. And then by the same token, Tabby is third person. So you're kind of watching him from the camera over here, and he has these wonderful plans, and you don't get to hear about the plan, you just have to see it. So he's kind of an unreliable narrator. So the question I was going to ask is, at what point is it, okay, well, my character is doing a thing, and I don't want my readers to know what he's doing, and at what point do you think, okay, well, now he's just pulling this out of his ass, and they're all going to be able to tell that he's pulling it out of his ass? Like, at what point does your narrator become too unreliable?
Ooh, that's a good question. I wish I had the answer to that one. Because I'm flirting with that in this book. Because although the main thing to do is you've got to be honest with your reader. And the other thing that you need to do, the thing that I've always thought that worked out well is if you drop a few things in that if the reader was slightly psychic, they could look at those things and go, oh, okay, that all fits. They could put it together if they were some kind of bizarre telepath. And then when they look back at it later, they'll go, oh, I should have figured it out from that. Yes, obviously, you should have figured out from the way this pencil was dropped that so-and-so in Sri Lanka was responsible. And generally, if you've got a couple of hints down there, or at least a trail of breadcrumbs that in retrospect makes sense, they'll let you get away with it. It's when you pull it out of completely nowhere. You know, it's when you get to the end of Dark Shadows and the Banshee Mother Ghost, who we've never seen at all, shows up and destroys the big bad guy. That you go, okay, whatever. Okay, all right, that just came out of nothing. It's when you've got to establish the things early on. You've got to plant early on for the things that are going to be big at the end. And as long as you do that, even if you don't tell the reader what it is, even if all you have is a box and the reader doesn't know what's in the box, if you then pull a gun out of the box, it's okay because they knew the box was there.
Actually, I've seen Dark Shadows. Let's say actually the kid says he's always talking to somebody.
Yeah, the kid is always talking to somebody, but you never see the mom. You know, you never get a chance to go, and maybe the mom is dangerous. You know. So it's sort of like, okay, yeah, I know these are shark-infested waters, but we never saw a fin before Jaws popped up out of the water and ate somebody. You know, it's like you need a little something.
So given that example, I haven't seen that movie, so I'm making this up as I go. But if the kid is scared of her, like every time you talk to her, he's like, then would that be the kind of thing you're looking at for breadcrumb?
Or if somebody winds up mysteriously dead and you don't know why, or if there was some kind of indication that there is another power at work here, that there are other things happening here.
So it doesn't even need to be the actual interaction. It can just be something that happened over here that later on that was. Okay.
Yeah, you've got to have supporting evidence for what something can do in order for it to be cool. You've got to have, if you're going to pull the mask off somebody at the end of the story, there needs to be inconsistencies in them, or apparent inconsistencies in them along the way, for you to go, oh, of course they were wearing a mask in retrospect.
So kind of like the reverse of Chekhov's gun.
Something like that.
Okay.
Although Chekhov's gun is also that's true. If there's a gun on the wall, if there's a sword on the wall, that sword needs to come off the wall and get used for something at some point. But yeah.
Yeah, do you recommend doing writing exercises, or
Okay.
are you more kind of focusing on writing your actual story?
Okay, I've never done a writing exercise. I just wrote stories.
I have a friend who does this like 100 word a day thing on random topics.
Right.
Would that be helpful? Or?
You know, the best way to practice for something is to do it. And you know, write your stories. And when you get done with the story, write the next story. You know, don't get stuck on the same story over and over. You've got to practice the craft. That's the only way to do it. If you want to be really good at making chairs, you can't just practice sanding and carving. You got to make chairs. You know, just a second. We'll go back here first.
So if you're writing first person, a lot of, or some of what you can say is thoughts within the character's head. Where do you find the balance for like, is too much thought in the head, you're giving away the whole story just by the guy's thoughts? Or is there a balance to that?
Yeah, there is. Where's the balance for writing when you're writing a character's thoughts and so on? Okay, the way you figure out the balance is the character's thoughts that are going on in his head. That's where you hit those heavy, but you only hit those heavy in the sequels. When you're going over his emotion, his reason, and so on. When you're busy doing scenes, while you will occasionally hit something from inside a character's head, or especially him making observations as to what's going on in a scene, you don't really get really hard into his reasoning until you get into the sequel. You don't want to bust up the speed of your scene with those kind of speed bumps. You want to make sure that you kind of gather that thought into a place, into one place, and to get it lined up in exactly the order you need, and in such a way to give the reader the information that they need. So really, basically, if you find that you're in your scene, your character's going on and on, thinking that you need to cut him off a little bit until you get to the end of the scene, and you give him a moment to think. Otherwise, while he's busy doing stuff, he shouldn't have time to think about stuff too much. If you're doing that, then maybe your story needs to be adjusted. But anybody else? Did you have one?
I had a follow-up, but I think I've lost track of what it was.
Oh.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
It does that too.
Yeah.
About writing exercises?
Yeah. My question was, okay, so we don't want to rewrite the same book over and over and over again, but one also hears that your first draft isn't done. How do you know that your first draft is where you want it for whatever how do you determine now I'm finished?
Oh man.
I'm trying to balance the don't rewrite the book with
Right.
this is only your first draft problem.
Right. Yeah, see, for me, I tend to outline really heavily. I don't really get it all written down on paper, but I've got to have a chapter laid out, and I know exactly what's going to happen in it in my head before I sit down to write it. And by the time, that's kind of the advantage of using a craft-heavy approach. By the time I've got it written, I don't usually have to write more than a draft or two. And with the exception of changes that I make because of reactions from my beta readers, I'll send the script off to the editor pretty much the way I've written it. And if you do that outline-heavy approach, that's the advantage of using that approach. On the other hand, your process is going to be different for every single writer, and so my process might not work for everybody. Ultimately, I think if you've gone over your book and you've given it a draft and you've given it a second or a third draft, and you're still not happy with it, maybe kind of back off and let that sit for a while, and go off to something else and then come back to it. Letting something sit for a while and coming back to it is a very useful skill to have too, because oftentimes a book that you absolutely hated while you're in the midst of working on it or immediately after you finished it, you'll go back and look at it and go, oh, that was awesome, because I hate every book immediately after I finished it. And I think it's a piece of trash. And I'll come back a while later and go, yeah, okay. And 6 months later, it's like, okay, that wasn't as awful as I thought it was. And it'll be more like a year before I can look back and go, and kind of rationally judge a book. How was that one? So.
In connection with that, you're talking about this outline heavy, process heavy. Are there some, and I think I was trying to ask you about this earlier, but are there some particular forms that you use for keeping track of, character detail or plot arcs or something like this?
Yeah, on every story. I use the stuff that I just shared with you. If you go to my live journal, just kind of those basic outline forms, stuff that I use for characters, where characters I'll make sure that I know the tags and the traits of every character that I'm going to be working with. All that stuff is on my live journal.
There's forms there?
Well, not really forms, but form in as much as, here's a sequel: emotion, reason, review, choice. And make sure I can write those things down. And at this point, I don't actually use on paper outlines. It's just, that's the process in my head. And once you practice it, it just happens, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Yes?
Do you have any other series or projects you're willing to mention?
Let's see. I've got we're going to do a couple new original graphic novel stories, which I'm going to be doing with Dynamite. I'm going to be doing, they're doing a follow-up to the role-playing game with the new Fate Accelerated system, which they're going to be releasing. I'm doing, I've got the Steampunk series that's coming out. I've got a Dresden Files spin-off series that I'm going to do eventually. I don't know if I'll start it before or after the Dresden Files are done. In general, I've always got something. I've got more stories in my head than I'm going to be able to live long enough to write. So at this point, it's just picking the best stories and getting them out there. I know that the past couple of years, I started several different projects to see which one of them kind of got traction. I kind of wrote this Black Company-esque fantasy thing. I worked on several other bits I wasn't feeling it. And when I got to the steampunk, I was feeling it. And so that was what I chose to do next. So.
Do you have any favorite moments or books that you've read?
Any favorite moments or favorite moments or books? Let's see. In the Alara books, Tavi going out to confront the Canaan army in the third book by himself. That was a moment, and then coming back with the lions coming out of the water. That was one of my favorite moments, because I had to write that one because they called me up and said, "Quick, we need to know." That was the year I'd been trying to write like 3 books and a graphic novel, which was insane. And they called up and said, "Quick, we need to know a great moment for the cover." They said, "Quick, we need to know a great moment for the cover." And I didn't want to tell anybody that, thank you. And I didn't want to tell anybody, "Oh gosh, I actually haven't gotten anything written yet. Or I've only gotten the first 2 chapters done." I didn't want to tell my editor that. So I said, okay, have Tavi in Roman armor holding a legion banner on the edge of a river with 2 giant lions made of water coming out of the river on either side of him. And they're like, "Ooh, that's awesome. We'll definitely use that. That's a wonderful moment. Thank you." And I hung up the phone and said, "How the hell am I going to have Tavi on the side of a river with 2 lions? Okay, I got to figure that out." So that was a favorite moment of mine because I had to make it. I was kind of under the gun for that. And then probably Tyrannosaurus Sue in the Dresden Files, because I'd been waiting to write that for like 5 years, and I finally got to write it, and I was like, ah! So that was a high point for me. Oh, also, shooting Harry Dresden at the end of Changes. Sorry if I just spoiled anybody. Because that was another moment where I was writing that, and I wasn't going, ah ha ha. I was more like, people are gonna scream. But really, you get moments like that in every book that you go, "Oh man, I've been waiting to write this. Good, I can finally do this part." And that's fun stuff. How are we doing for time, by the way? What time is it?
We'll sit here as long as you like.
You get a whole other hour.
I've got a whole nother hour?
It's
11:30. Okay, no. What are you? You're trying to cheat me here. I've got to be somewhere at 12:30.
Where?
The Dark Lord disagrees.
Man, this is just awesome.
You get a light show.
Is this just us, or is it the whole hotel?
I'm guessing it's the ballroom. It's the ballroom next door. Because last night they had this gone and we were doing the whole thing. And so it connected with
Right, so there's somebody over there leaning against the wall, okay.
No, it's probably something they're trying to figure out what they want.
Right, over here.
Do you have subjects that you feel are no-fly zones as far as writing about?
There is one thing that you can't do in writing, okay, and this is the only thing that is a true no-fly zone for your protagonist. You cannot have your protagonist wallow in self-pity. It just can't be done, because nobody respects a protagonist who does that. The only thing you can do, you can have him feel self-pity and then smack himself across the face immediately and pull himself out of it, because that you can respect that. But the one thing you really can't do as a protagonist is you can't have a protagonist feel self-pity. I mean, we can get into other completely taboo subjects that you can do, but really, as far as writing storycraft goes, self-pity is the only absolute no, because nobody gives a damn about that. Go around feeling sorry for yourself. Jesus, get up. You know, and you don't want your reader saying that about your protagonist, because they won't follow that. That'll make people drop a book faster than anything else. Yep.
How difficult is it to remain consistent as a writer but continue to evolve?
To remain consistent as a writer but continue to evolve, it's a good question, because especially if you're writing a long-term series like the Dresden Files, you know, you've got to stay true to what you gave people at the beginning while still showing them how someone grows, and that's tough to do. Honestly, it's very tough to do. Stay on it. Stay involved in it. I think the really bad changes happen when you suddenly take a hard right turn in a series, for example. For instance, with like what Laurel Hamilton did with her series, where it was a very gumshoey PI series until we hit a certain point, and suddenly it was sex, and while I've got nothing against a series that's sex, that's cool and it's great. And she's done very well with it. And she's enjoying her work. That wasn't the book. That wasn't what I signed on for when I started reading the series. So I mean, it's something you really have to stop and consider as you go on as a writer. I think that when you have big lengths of time between your books, that's when a lot of things happen, because life comes along and changes you. So one of the ways you hang on is by keeping the character sheets on your characters and reminding yourself who they are, going back and rereading your own stuff, reminding yourself who your characters are and what is important to them, making sure they stay focused on their goals and on the core concept of who they are. You know, you can change things about Harry. Harry's gotten smarter, and he's gotten used to doing things a little more subtly, and he's gotten used to admitting that he can't do it all himself. As he gets older. But at the same time, if I ever break away from Harry being kind of that individual, kind of that lone wizard figure, he's going to be a different person, and the stories are going to be very different stories, and people aren't necessarily going to be on board with that. I'm going to lose some readers to that. So really, it's something you have to be consciously aware of as a writer. You have to be aware of once you're aware of how you create a character, how a character goes through a process of making his choices and changing, that kind of helps tell you how you keep your character true to himself. And again, that's a matter of practice, and it's a matter of you being able to step back and look at that character and say, this is what makes him who he is.
In continuously writing to keep up your practice, do you find it easier to come up with independent stories, or building on stuff that you've done before, just in building your practice?
Okay, when you're getting your stories built up, especially when you're learning, writing as many different things as possible. Not necessarily the same continuing story, but going from story to story is what teaches you more than anything else. You know, once you're going, what is good for you as a writer is what the editor tells you to get done on time. You know, and at that point, once you're doing that, then you've got a contract, and what's good for you is what gets you to the end of your contract. But as you're learning, get as much different stuff in as possible, because you might find that you have a great aptitude at one thing when you were only meh at something else. I was okay at writing fantasy. I mean, I still don't regard it as my strength because I'm not as strong a third-person writer as I am a first-person writer. And it turned out that I had an aptitude for that sort of thing, and that's one of the reasons the Dresden Files has done well. And I would never have known that or never have done that if I hadn't listened to my instructor and tried that. But I mean, that was something new and uncomfortable for me. But it turned out I was pretty good.
Just as far as when you're writing this kind of story, like in Dresden Files, kind of the use of magical gadgets. In the first book, you had the potion, that kind of get out of jail free card, and then like in the seventh, you had the bear charm. Is there kind of a balance to having too many gadgets versus how? What are your thoughts on that?
It depends on you as a writer. I think ultimately, what needs to drive the story, what really needs to make the biggest difference in terms of answering your story question, yes or no, needs to be the core concept of your character. Harry Dresden needs to win the fight because he has a certain amount of skill and courage, and because he does not quit, not because he brought his blasting rod along. Everything else just needs to be an expression of who that character is. For Harry, the potions are all about, that's about sort of his Boy Scout nature of being prepared ahead of time. Because that's sort of one of the philosophies of being a wizard is you need to be ready for things, you need to be prepared. And so for that's part of his character, and it needs to be an expression of his character. If that ever started overshadowing his character because he was nothing but gadgets, then that would be telling a different kind of story. If your character is somebody who gadgets are what he does, then you've got MacGyver, and that's a different character. MacGyver is able to do these incredible improvisational things with, God knows what. The A-team needs to be able to build machine guns out of, PVC and an old Ben Franklin stove, that sort of thing. Because that was, to a degree, that was who their characters were. But at the end of the day, it needs to be your character, his core personality, that is the answer to the problem, more than anything he has or anything any particular skills he might possess.
How do you feel about plot hooks? I associate it more with like British writers, but the guys can throw in like 50 plot hooks into a scene, knowing they're gonna not use half of them, maybe for 3 books.
Plot hooks, okay, when you throw out the plot hooks, and God knows I've dropped enough of them out there, a lot of times that's one of those things that I run on instinct on. It's like, okay, I want to drop a plot hook here. There's one in chapter 1 of Skin Game where I kind of introduce this character that I know I'm not going to use for 4 or 5 more books. But I want to get him established to use in the future, so I'm planning for the future. It's a long-term series is what I'm doing. I dropped the frickin' dragon in book 3, and I know he's not going to come back until book 19. But he's going to be out there somewhere. The main thing is that I would try and run it at about a 2-to-1 of making sure that I answer more plot hooks in this book than I drop. And other writers would disagree. George Martin drops hooks left, right, and center. It's kind of what he does. But for me personally, I try and run it at about 2-to-1 of here, I'm satisfying you versus here, I'm still teasing you.
At some point in your career, obviously, you've been writing at a day job. How long did it take you to write a novel when you had a day job? How long does it take you when you don't have a day job?
It took me about the same amount of time to write a novel having a day job as not having a day job, because you can only get so many useful work hours out of a day. And after that, your brain is just too tired, and you're not pushing any more out that day until you've had some rest. So that didn't really matter as much for me. Plus, I had the advantage of my main day job when I was writing was I was working as a computer tech at a local internet provider, and I was the all-night IT guy. So I went in at 10, and it was my job to answer the phone and solve problems until 6 a.m. And really, my actual job was to not wake up any of the programmers. So it was for me to figure out a way to just keep things limping along until the programmers came into work in the morning. And I was very good at that. I was very good at, it's like, okay, you know what? I can include something together that will hold for 3 hours. And I know it's not going to hold once the traffic starts hitting in the morning, but you know, it'll hold up till the programmers get here, and I won't have to get anybody out of bed. And they loved me for that. But at the same time, you know, that was a job where by 12:30 or 1, the call volume was trickling off, and I could work the rest of the evening. And I would sit there. Okay, I sat there playing EverQuest most of the time. But I also wrote, and I got a big chunk of several Dresden Files books done there. But yeah, I mean, you gotta make. I mean, at the end of the day, every writer who breaks in, they had to do it as an additional part-time job, and that's how you have to look at it. An additional part-time job isn't going to pay you for a long, long time. That said, though, having gotten to the end of that, totally worth it. I'd do it again if it had taken me twice as long. So, you know, hang in there.
You talk a lot about the experience of being told that, you know, you're doing it wrong and disagreeing with it and doing it to prove a point. But how did you go about actually finding that program, or is it just something somebody told you about, or did you actually do research to
Oh, to go find the writing program at OU?
Yeah.
I stumbled across it. I was at OU because they were willing to give me a big scholarship. And I stumbled across the program. I decided I wanted to write novels the next year, and was wondering where I could learn more about that. And I went to the OU English department because I figured English, writing, that's where writing happens, is in English. And I got my English degree, which probably set my writing career back about 3 years. And but then I kind of stumbled across I wanted to meet Roger Zelazny, and he was coming to the professional writing seminar at OU. And then I went, wait, there's another writing program somewhere else? And I did not know until then that there was this huge rivalry between English and the journalism program. Because, you know, all the professors in journalism, you know, they had 30 or 40 novels each under their belts and made money at it. And I think that really put them off with the professors. I know that they didn't like it in my program when they asked me what my goals as a writer. They were going around the room in our senior capstone course. What are your goals as a writer? I want to explore the depths of the human condition. You know, I want to create art, you know, that people will admire in the future. And you know, I want to document the soul of my time. And they got to me and they're like, what about you? What are your goals as a writer? I said, I want to go to Barnes & Noble and hold up a yardstick to the shelf and have my books go off either end. And there was such contempt for me in that room. Man, that was not the place for me, man. I got my degree there, but that was not the place for me. And it spread too, because, you know, when I know in my capstone course, everybody else, we went around and we got assigned random assignments by the professor of what we were supposed to do, the big presentation we were supposed to do, our big paper for our senior thesis, and as it were. And you know, the guy next to me got The Second Coming by William Yeats. He was going to be doing his thing over the 16 or 20 line poem. The guy on the other side of me had a Shakespeare sonnet. I got War and Peace. And that's not an exaggeration at all. I had to do War and Peace that semester, man. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be a different level of focus on the aspect of writing wherever you go. What I'm teaching you is storycraft that is very practical. This is I'm giving you the technical school of writing. This is how you get your hands in and get out and start making stuff. I know there are other places there are professors and there are people who are very good who are going to disagree with me completely on everything I say and do, and that's cool. You can have a different opinion. You can go do that. I'm teaching you guys what I do and what I know, and you can take it with a grain of salt. But I know that it works because I've taught other people and they've gotten into the industry. You know, they have careers now. So.
Can you speak a little bit about the steampunk? Anything you want to say about it, like the challenges, the differences, what drew you to it?
Oh, well, what drew me me to it is all the cool steampunk cosplay, and I wanted to write characters that people could go cosplay. And that was kind of my first impulse was, you know, they've got all this great steampunk costuming. I should write characters that people could go dress up as. That would be fun. And so I'm doing that. And I'm going to have to go in and alter the book a little bit because I found a really cool captain's coat at Comic-Con that fit me really well, so I had to buy it. I'm going to have to go write that thing into the book now, man, because it's just too cool.
When you say people can go cosplay, you mean you can go cosplay.
Yeah, okay, granted, yeah, one of the... I will be able to pull off one of those characters, because I can't pull off anybody in the Dresden Files. They're all tall. But you know, I could maybe do Butters, except I've been working out. Now I can't do Butters now. He's skinnier than me. But anyway, yeah, that was one of the things. That was kind of my initial impulse. I would do something people can have fun cosplaying. That would be awesome. And then I kind of started putting the steampunk story world together with the various things that I wanted. And it's like, I want to do something hornblowery. Awesome. I'm going to have Airship Navy slugging it out. And I want to do something kind of X-Men-y. Okay, awesome. I'm going to put together a special forces team, you know, more or less. The special operations team of all these people with these fantastic individual skills. You know, something that makes them extremely cool. You know, and I want to be able to do talking cats. You know, one of the viewpoint characters is a cat, and he's just so much fun to write. I've got to be careful or he'll take over the entire thing. But I mean, he's a character who's just, you know, basically these are the children of Mister, you know, running around this world. You know, kind of like the Kanan were that's, if my dog was a 9-foot-tall werewolf, that's how he would behave. That's who he thinks he is. And he doesn't know he's a 20-pound French dog. You know, he thinks he's a much larger. Don't tell him if you see him, okay? Because I haven't had the heart. You know, to tell him that you're a Bichon Frise, man. Man, he's a warrior. He's sure of it.
Speaking of cosplay, I mean, walking around this con and various others, I mean, I've seen here at least 6 or 7 Harrys wandering around.
Those people.
How do the cosplayers' interpretations of the character, how does it mirror how you personally visualize them?
Well, most of them wear a hat.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, there's no hat. There's not a hat. It's only on the cover. You know, that's something the artist did. But, I mean, other than that, I mean, people should have a good time cosplaying. It's not about who I think the character looks like. You know.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, have any of the cosplayers, something you've seen on them, made you think something about Harry that they saw and that you hadn't envisioned?
No, not so much.
Okay.
I mean, mostly you're dressed up as Harry Dresden. Cool. I'm glad you're having fun. You know, that's kind of where I am. I try and the book world and the real world don't often intersect and stuff like that. I don't like putting people I know into books. I don't like grabbing things and just thrusting it wholesale into a book. So, you know, not so much. But I always enjoy seeing people cosplay. It's always fun, especially Molly's. Cute chicks. Okay. Hey.
You ever thought about, I mean, like you just hit the goal price like that. You were talking about some of your ideas and don't tell the players and just throw it out to them, and then try to pull away from that from some of the players.
Oh, I steal stuff from my players constantly, and I tell them that. It's like, listen, if you do anything cool, it might end up in a book, and you need to know that ahead of time going in. And they'll be like, yeah, okay, that's cool. And one of the best things about the players is that, because I'll run games that are set in my story worlds, and I'll be trying to run a game, and because they're players, they don't ever do what you want them to do. You know, they take off in random, ridiculous directions that you never would have considered. And I kind of feel like, you know, and because they're doing it in the world that I'm building, I kind of feel like I'm frantically running out ahead of them, nailing down floor. Because I've got to be making this stuff up, because there they went off in a direction I never thought they would go. And that's good for me as a creator, because it kind of forces you to start drawing upon, that creative stuff, even when you had no idea that that was going to be happening. So yeah, I mean, I've got my epic fantasy epic story world, because one day I'm going to write an epic fantasy epic, and it will be epic with dwarves and hobbits and elves. Only they won't look like that, but they will be, but they won't look like that. And I keep, the story world keeps getting bigger and bigger because the players keep doing the most insane things, and that's what players do. Characters try and do it to you too, but don't let them. Those people work for you.
So it seems like a character Bible when you're creating a brand new character. It seems like it's in your head, or do you actually write it out when you first start?
Oh, I write it out and I draw them and everything.
Is it like just 5 things, or does it fill up the whole page when you're writing a new character?
It depends on how big they're supposed to be.
Okay.
The more their choices are going to affect the story, the more write-up they get.
Okay.
Kind of building on that. So what system did you use to build Harry Dresden in person?
D&D.
What class was he? Just straight up wizard?
Yeah, he was a wizard.
Okay.
And he's a magic. Well, no, he wasn't a wizard. He was a magic user, because that was what was in D&D at the time, was magic users. But yeah, I mean, I sort of wrote him up as a D&D character, and then started filling out his writing traits and so on.
Do you do that for all the characters though, or is it just a couple?
No, well, these days, I mean, because that's not really useful. Knowing Harry Dresden's dexterity is not useful to the story. So what I do for my characters now is I just make sure that I write out their tags. I write out their main character traits, which are going to be the things that I associate with them. I write out the main parts of their story that are germane to whatever the plot is that I'm telling. And then I'll throw in a couple of random details that might be stuff that I drop in about their past, or it might not ever drop into the past. Murphy's afraid of dogs, and that I know that, but it hasn't ever really made it into the story. Mouse was terrifying. The Loop Guru was absolutely horrifying to Murphy, but that's not, Murphy doesn't reveal that kind of weakness though. She's a woman that is working in a man's world, and that's not something she can afford to do. So she's very good at hiding her fear.
That's important. Because you know that she has a fear that she's hiding.
Yes, exactly. I wouldn't have known that unless I hadn't had that there. So it's always great when you grab a few little things like that to add to your character so that you know what's going on in the background.
You've written for a number of anthologies, but not really any co-authoring credits. Would you be interested in that? And is there anyone in particular you would like to write with?
Okay, would I be interested in co-authoring? Is there anyone I'd like to write with? There's nobody I hate that much. Seriously, man, I am not the guy to work with on that stuff. I am the most petulant child, and I do things at the very last minute. I'm not sure that would work out with anybody I've ever met. Shannon and I tried to write, my ex-wife and I tried to write a play together in high school, and we just about gouged out one another's eyes with our number 2 pencils. So that did not work out at all. And that experience has taught me. I can barely write games with people, and that's an experience that has nearly ended friendship. So it's like, no, I'm not going to inflict myself on somebody else professionally because I am such a diva. No.
As a woman who works in a predominantly male environment, thank you for writing her the way you do.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know who you talked to, you got insight, and I don't know where you got it from, but you did a fantastic job.
I just kind of look at things and try and figure it, and
You did a fantastic job.
oh well, thank you. Okay, I think we're about out of time, right? 11:50. Okay, well, my mouth is dry and my feet are tired. So. All right, we're done. I'm going to go sign some books in about half an hour. So if any of you have any books you want signed or anything, I'll be over there. Thank you very much.